a rap career on one image. The trap boy, the street dude, the real one from Oak Cliff who came up
Clear
with nothing
side.
and never switched up. And for years, that image worked. It worked so well that it got him signed to 300 Entertainment, landed him on remix tracks with 2 Chainz, T.I., Boosie, and Jeezy, and made him one of the most recognized names out of Dallas, Texas. He sold you the idea that he was 100% that guy. Authentic, uncut, from the mud. But here's what's crazy. The deep.
So one thing what I'm not gonna do is stand on trap, bro. I'm out here. I've been hearing about traps all little nigga, bro. We about the same age, nigga. I was hearing about trap at that age, bro. And trap been a get money nigga, bro. That I ain't gonna stun on the dude, bro. He been a get money nigga, man. So
But you dig
shout
into
out to Trap for
Trapboy
getting out
Freddy's
the
story,
mud, you hear
the
me?
more the cracks start to show.
ain't
Because
gonna
this is a
stun on
man
him.
who styled himself as a drug dealer and a street legend, while the people closest to him and the streets he came from started telling a very different story. And now in 2026, Trapboy Freddy is on the prosecution's witness list in Yella Beezy's capital murder trial. The trial for the alleged murder for hire killing of fellow Dallas rapper MO3 back in November 2020.
It's
His
Mo3,
name,
not
Devarius
MO3.
Moore, is right there in the court documents, listed as a witness for the state of Texas in a case that carries the death penalty. Let that sink in. The man who rapped about street loyalty, about being real, about never switching sides, is now set to take the stand in one of the most consequential murder trials in Dallas rap history, against a man he called his brother, against a man he made music with, a man he called his homie, a man he did a whole collaborative project with. And you want to talk about faking an image? This is what the ending looks like when the image you built was never real. This whole situation, Trapboy Freddy, set to potentially testify for the prosecution in Yella Beezy's capital murder case, has ripped the mask clean off because when the cameras are off and the judge calls your name, you can't rap your way out of it. You either stand on what you said you were, or you sit in that chair, raise your right hand, and prove everybody right whoever said the image was never real. And when you look back at Trapboy Freddy's entire career with fresh eyes, the picture that forms is one of a man who spent years packaging someone else's struggle as his own brand. Not because he came from nowhere, he didn't, but because the version of himself he sold to rap was always bigger, darker, and more dangerous than what actually existed. And when real life came knocking in the form of a federal gun charge, a tiger in his house, and now a capital murder witness subpoena, the whole thing unraveled. So today, we are going all the way in. We are talking about who Trapboy Freddy really is, where he actually came from, what his past really looks like under the microscope, how he built this trap dealer image with music and social media, what the streets of Dallas actually say about him, and how all of it, every bit of it, connects to this moment where his name is sitting in a murder trial for his supposed homie. Because nothing in this story is random. Every dot connects. And by the time this video is done, you are going to see Trapboy Freddy very differently than you do right now. Let's get into it. But real quick, if you're serious about winning in the rap game, I put everything I know into one ebook. Rap lifestyle is what he wanted the world to associate with him. And for a long time it worked. The mixtapes were Cougar in the title, the imagery, the energy, and the music. It all painted a picture of a man who had lived this life, breathed it, survived it. But as we are going to break down piece by piece, the image and the reality were two very different animals. And the thing that makes this story so layered is that Trapboy Freddy is not a fraud in the classic sense. He's not someone who grew up in the suburbs pretending to be from the hood. He genuinely came from difficult circumstances. His childhood was real. His struggle was real. But at some point, the struggle stopped being enough to tell, and the character he built for the rap game became something larger than what was true. That's the line. And crossing that line in hip-hop, especially in a city like Dallas where the streets have long memories, will always catch up with you eventually. For Trapboy Freddy, it caught up with him in a capital murder trial. To understand how all of this really went down, we gotta go back to the beginning. We gotta go back to Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas, and a kid named Devarius Dantes Moore. Let's rewind to January 14th, 1992. That's when Devarius Dantes Moore was born in Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas. He came into the world as the youngest of 5 siblings, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. And from the jump, life was not easy. His family situation was complicated from day one. He has spoken in interviews about having 3 different father figures in his life growing up, none of whom was his biological father. whose identity remained unclear throughout his childhood. His mother, whose name he rarely shared publicly, was in survival mode trying to raise 5 kids, and there were stretches where she had to steal just to put food on the table and provide basic necessities. According to what Freddy himself shared in interviews, she was caught and ended up incarcerated, which left the household without his center. To make things worse, his older brother, someone who should have been a stable presence, was paralyzed in a car accident. That accident changed the family dynamic permanently. It meant Freddy, even as a young kid, had to step into a role bigger than his age. When you are the youngest but circumstances force you to grow up fast, the streets become very appealing very quickly. Not as a choice, but as an environment you absorb when the adults who are supposed to protect you are either gone, incarcerated, or physically unable to provide. By the time Freddy was a teenager, he was deep in Oak Cliff street culture. He has claimed in interviews that he had a trap house at 14 years old. A bold statement that, if true, would have put him in extraordinarily dangerous territory for someone that age. He was involved with a Dallas gang known as DF Dub, and the streets became his primary school. His older peers were not musicians or athletes. They were people navigating survival by any means available. Drug dealing, gang activity, and the constant threat of violence were the wallpaper of his formative years. And again, this part is real. These experiences are documented, they are consistent across his interviews, and nobody credible has disputed that Devarius Moore grew up poor, grew up hard, and grew up in a neighborhood that demanded you pick a side fast. Here's where things started getting complicated. By 17, Freddy was already catching legal problems. His early run-ins with the law began piling up. He spent time in and out of jail in his late teens, racking up violations that would eventually result in him receiving 10 years of probation as a young man. 3 years of in and out of jail, violations, and street activity was the pattern until he hit 21 and made what he has described as a conscious decision to pivot toward music. That pivot is real too. People have moments of clarity, and by his own account, Freddy looked at his life, looked at where the streets were taking him, and decided to try something different. The thing is, by the time he decided to rap, he already had a story to tell. He had lived through poverty, lost family members, survived the streets, and come out the other side. That's compelling material for a rapper. The question, and this is the question at the center of this whole video, is what he did with that material. Because there's a difference between rapping about what you've been through and rapping about being something you never fully were. That distinction matters a lot in hip hop. It matters to the culture, and it definitely matters to the streets. So in the early 2010s, Devarius Moore picked up a mic and started calling himself Trapboy Freddy. He was interested in freestyling from his teenage years, inspired by artists like Boosie Badaz and Kevin Gates. Two rappers famously associated with real street credibility, real legal problems, real time served. Freddy admired that energy and tried to replicate it. He recorded his first song, posted it online, and it got attention. He made a video, and that did well too. He started releasing mixtapes and building a fan base through the local Dallas club scene and social media. By 2014, he had his first project out. Second quarter, he followed it with third quarter in 2015, fourth quarter in 2016, and the Trapboy Freddy Krueger series starting in 2015 and going through 3 volumes. These were the projects that put his name on a map in Dallas. They were gritty, street-oriented projects that leaned hard into the trap sound and imagery. Freddy positioned himself fully as a street rapper coming from the trenches. And in Dallas, that positioning had to hold up to scrutiny because Oak Cliff is not a forgiving neighborhood when it comes to artists who oversell their past. This is important because right from the beginning, the branding was built on a foundation that was partially true and partially constructed. Yes, he came from Oak Cliff. Yes, his childhood was genuinely hard. But the trap boy identity, the drug dealer persona, was a narrative that he sold with much more confidence than the facts supported. And as his career began to grow, that gap between the image and the reality would start to widen. By the mid-2010s, Trapboy Freddy was starting to gain real traction in the Dallas rap scene. His mixtape releases were consistent, his regional profile was growing, and he was starting to build a network with other Oak Cliff artists. The most important of those relationships was with a rapper named Marquise Conway, better known as Yella Beezy. Yella Beezy was on his own come up at the same time, and the two artists from the same neighborhood formed what looked on the surface like a genuine brotherhood. They collabed on tracks, they showed up at each other's events, they shouted each other out online, In interviews, Freddy referred to Beezy as his brother. They were the poster children for the idea that Oak Cliff could produce multiple rap superstars simultaneously. But even in these early years, there were people in Dallas rap circles quietly raising eyebrows at Trapboy Freddy. The question that kept surfacing in comment sections and street conversations and interviews that touched on his background was a simple one: was the trap and Trapboy Freddy really representative of who this man had been? Because in hip-hop, especially in a city like Dallas where the street culture is layered and the people who actually live the life know each other, you can't just announce yourself as a trap boy without people who know the actual trappers in the area doing a quiet fact check on your credentials. The All Hip Hop interview from 2020 is telling. Freddy claimed to All Hip Hop that he had a trap house at 14. That's a big claim. Running a trap house at 14 puts you in extraordinarily specific legal and physical danger. It means you are managed.
Like I said, bro, I ain't gonna play trap. Trap been getting it since he was 14. I'm not gonna stun on the man background. The boy been having it. Like you said, he was up in Carter doing it. You hear me? He had this shit sold up, so I ain't gonna stun on my man, bro.
Product,
I ain't gonna stun on my man for getting how he got
the
it.
Threat of rival crews and law enforcement at 14 years old. The people who actually lived this life in Dallas would know whether that claim held up, and the silence from his actual community on verifying these details was always notable. He claimed it, nobody from the streets confirmed it in detail. And the picture of his criminal record, which did include drug possession charges, suggested someone who was around the drug game, not necessarily running it. According to his family, Trapboy Freddy had a criminal history that included drug possession. His aunt confirmed that publicly when speaking to WFAA after his 2022 arrest. Drug possession is different from drug distribution. Drug possession means you have product on you. It doesn't mean you were the one moving weight, setting up operations, or running the streets in the way his music described. And this is where the faking the image angle of this story becomes concrete, because there is a significant distance between rapping about selling drugs and having actually been a major player in the drug trade. And Trapboy Freddy, based on his actual documented criminal history, appears to have been much closer to the former than the latter. But here is where it gets crazy. None of this slowed down his career, because in hip-hop, image is almost as powerful as reality. If you can make the music convincing enough, if you can rap about the life with enough conviction, enough detail, people will extend you the benefit of the doubt. And Trapboy Freddy could rap. He had real pain to draw from, real hardship to reference, and enough familiarity with the culture he was depicting to make his music resonate. The mixtapes were connecting, the local scene was embracing him, and by 2017 and 2018, his profile was about to jump to a completely different level. The song that changed everything was That's On Me by Yella Beezy. Freddy was featured on a remix alongside 2 Chainz, T.I., Boosie Badazz, Young Jeezy, and Rich the Kid. That remix turned into one of the biggest records to come out of Dallas in years. And having his name attached to a track with that caliber of features meant Trapboy Freddy was now getting looked at by people way outside of Texas. The song was everywhere. It earned platinum certifications. And Freddy rode that momentum hard. Around the same time, he signed with 300 Entertainment, the label home of Megan Thee Stallion, Young Thug, and Gunna. That signing meant real label money, real promotion budgets, and real mainstream infrastructure behind him for the first time. Alongside his own imprint, Cool Money Entertainment, Trapboy Freddy now had the resources to present himself to the world exactly how he wanted to be seen. And he leaned all the way into the Trap Boy image. The Instagram posts, the music videos, the flex content, all of it painted a picture of a man who had come from the deepest part of the streets and made it out by staying true. But fast forward to November 2018, and we get the first major public crack in the image. A video leaked on social media showing Trapboy Freddy getting handcuffed on the ground by police. The video spread quickly and raised immediate questions about his legal situation and what he had actually done. He was later charged with evading arrest in that 2018 incident. Evading arrest? Not drug trafficking charges, not weapons charges from running a major operation. The charge that stuck from this incident was evading. It was enough to put him on probation, and that probation will come back to haunt him in 2022 in a major way. Here's where it gets real. In the meantime, the Dallas rap scene was getting darker. Another major Oak Cliff artist, MO3, real name Melvin Noble, was rising fast and had a complicated relationship with Yella Beezy that had become an open feud by 2017. The two men exchanged diss tracks, clashed on social media, and had a rivalry that people in Dallas knew was not just rap beef, it was something with real hostility underneath it. Trapboy Freddy, as a close associate of Yella Beezy, was enmeshed in that dynamic. His collaboration On Your Head with Yella Beezy would later become one of the songs that prosecutors tried to introduce as evidence in the Capitol murder trial, with detectives testifying that lyrics on the track referenced hiring people to commit violence. The relationship between Freddy and Beezy was not just personal, it was commercial, and it was strategic. In hip-hop, proximity to power matters. When Yella Beezy started climbing, having his name attached to your work meant something. And Freddy leaned into that association hard. They did the joint project I'm My Brother's Keeper together, a 13-track album released in 2020. They dropped videos together. They moved in overlapping circles. On the surface, it looked like two Oak Cliff legends building together. Underneath the surface, the Dallas rap scene was sitting on a powder keg. Because at the same time Freddy and Beezy were building their brotherhood narrative, the feud between Beezy and MO3 was intensifying into something that people in Dallas could feel was going to end badly. MO3, born Melvin Noble, was one of the most genuinely talented voices to come out of Dallas in years. He could sing, he could rap, and his street authenticity was not in question. But his relationship with Yella Beezy had curdled into something toxic. Both artists had spoken publicly about the feud. MO3 accused Beezy of having him excluded and arrested at a 2019 concert at the Star in Frisco, a concert headlined by Beezy alongside Future and Juice WRLD. MO3 claimed that the arrest, which occurred on an active warrant, was engineered by Beezy and his associates to keep him away from the show and away from the spotlight. Beezy denied all of it, but the accusation was out there, and people in Dallas were paying attention. The feud had also been fueled by earlier events. A Dallas comedian named Roylee Pate, who was close to MO3 and had publicly clowned on Yella Beezy, was assaulted in August 2017. That assault became part of the court record in the Beezy trial. Pate was later shot and killed in September 2018. His death added another layer of grief and anger to a situation that was already well past the point of resolution. And Trapboy Freddy, as Beezy's closest public associate, was seen as someone in the same camp, which meant his relationship with MO3 was also strained. Court records and pretrial testimony reference a contentious dynamic between MO3 and Trapboy Freddy as part of the broader Dallas rap hostilities that preceded the 2020 murder. Then, on November 11, 2020, MO3 was shot and killed on Interstate 35E in Dallas, in broad daylight on a highway. The gunman, later identified as Kewan Dontrell White, pulled up to MO3's car while wearing a black ski mask, approached on foot, and opened fire. MO3 got out of his car and tried to run, but White shot him multiple times in the back. MO3 was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was 28 years old. Dallas and hip-hop lost a genuinely talented artist in an act of violence that shocked even people who knew the beef had been serious. Kewan White was arrested in December 2020, about a month after the shooting. But the bigger question, who ordered the hit, remained unanswered for years. Years of rumors, years of speculation, years of people in the Dallas rap community whispering the same name. And then, in March 2025, it happened. A Dallas County grand jury indicted Yella Beezy, real name Marquise Conway, on a charge of capital murder for remuneration. The indictment alleged that Yella Beezy had paid Kewan White to carry out the killing of MO3. And right there, in the middle of all of it, was the name Devarius Moore, Trapboy Freddy. The prosecution's witness list. The capital murder trial of Yella Beezy is set to begin on August 24th, 2026. If convicted, Beezy faces either life in prison without parole or the death penalty under Texas law. That is how serious this situation is. And Trapboy Freddy, his longtime music collaborator, his supposed brother from Oak Cliff, is listed on the state's witness list. According to court documents, a reporter from the Dallas Observer, Fox 4 Dallas, NBC5 Dallas Fort Worth, and Hot 97, the prosecution's witness list for the Yella Beezy trial, contains 194 names. One of those names is Devarius Moore, the same Devarius Moore who made music with Yella Beezy throughout the 2010s, the same man who appeared on that That's On Me remix with him, the same man who did a joint project titled I'm My Brother's Keeper with Beezy. The optics of that project title alone in this context is staggering. I'm My Brother's Keeper. And now Freddy is listed as a state witness in his alleged murder for hire case. The relationship between Trapboy Freddy, Yella Beezy, and the MO3 murder situation is layered in ways that make this story almost impossible to fully untangle. Here is what the court documents and the pretrial hearings reveal. First, the song On Ya Head, a collaboration between Trapboy Freddy and Yella Beezy, was one of the tracks that prosecutors attempted to introduce as evidence in the trial. Dallas detective Eric Barnes testified during a pretrial hearing that, based on lyrics in Beezy and Trapboy Freddy's songs, he believed Beezy had hired hitmen, referred to in the lyrics as hitters, to murder MO3. According to Barnes, the song On Ya Head contained lyrics where Trapboy Freddy rapped about hiring people to commit violence for $50,000. The prosecution argued this was not just artistic expression, but evidence of the mentality and operations of the people involved in MO3's death. The judge's ruling on the music was nuanced. She allowed certain songs to be heard by the jury, including On Ya Head, but ruled that Trapboy Freddy's vocals on that track had to be redacted before it could be played in court. Think about what that means. The judge determined that Freddy's voice, his words on that specific song, was potentially prejudicial or sensitive enough in the context of this trial that it needed to be stripped out before a jury could hear it. Not because Freddy has been charged, he has not been charged in the MO3 murder, but because the content of what he rapped on that track was deemed significant enough to require careful handling. Additionally, Instagram live footage of Yella Beezy in conversation with Trapboy Freddy was reviewed by the court during the pretrial hearings. The court also examined a December 2020 Instagram live that prosecutors described as a call between Beezy and Trapboy Freddy. December 2020, that's 1 month after MO3 was murdered on that highway. Whatever was said in that conversation became part of the legal record that attorneys on both sides argued over in pretrial proceedings. Now here's where the story takes another dramatic turn. Reports began circulating in 2025 that Trapboy Freddy had actually been identified as a wanted suspect in the MO3 killing. Not just a witness, but someone law enforcement was looking for in connection with the case. A report from Hype Fresh, citing law enforcement sources, stated that Trapboy Freddy had been named a wanted suspect, with new leads implicating him in the plot. His defense team, according to the Dallas Observer, clarified in court that Freddy is neither a co-conspirator nor has he ever been associated with the murder of MO3. So there's a dispute between what law enforcement was reportedly looking at and what Freddy's camp was saying publicly. What ultimately emerged from the pretrial proceedings was that Trapboy Freddy is now listed as a prosecution witness, meaning the state of Texas believes his testimony will help their case against Yella Beezy, not hurt it. That is the move that made the internet go absolutely wild, because from the outside looking in, Trapboy Freddy, the man who built an entire career on the trap image, the loyalty to the streets, the my brother's keeper energy, is now potentially going to take the stand and say things that could help put Yella Beezy in prison for life. Or worse, Yella Beezy reacted to the situation publicly, and the reaction made the rounds on social media. His team's response to the news of Freddy's position in this trial was not warm. In the court of public opinion, what Trapboy Freddy is doing, regardless of the legal nuances, regardless of whether he was subpoenaed or went voluntarily, reads on the streets as something specific. And the streets of Oak Cliff and Dallas have very particular language for that thing. But here's the layer that makes this story about more than just snitching or not snitching. Because if you strip away the street code conversation for a second and just look at the facts, what you see is a man who built his brand on being the trap boy, on being about that life, but who, when real legal pressure was applied, did not stand on what his music described. And that is not separate from the fake image story. That is the fake image story. Because the real ones, the people who actually lived the life Trapboy Freddy said he lived, rarely end up in a courtroom as a prosecution witness against their closest associates. That is not how that world works. And the fact that Freddy landed there tells you something about who he was when the cameras were off. Let's back up and look at Trapboy Freddy's legal history in detail, because it paints a very specific portrait that is directly relevant to the fake image conversation. His first major legal confrontation came when he was still a teenager. By 17, he was already accumulating charges. The nature of those early charges, drug possession, street level violations, was consistent with someone who was around the drug trade but not necessarily running it. The distinction is important. Drug possession tells you someone had drugs. It does not tell you they were a major player in the distribution business. And for a man who sold himself as a trap operator, someone who ran a trap house at 14, the charges on his record were notably lacking in the kind of serious trafficking allegations you would expect from someone with that level of claimed involvement. He received 10 years of probation as a result of his early legal troubles. That probation became the thread that tied together multiple subsequent legal situations. When the 2018 evading arrest incident happened, the video of him being cuffed on the ground that went viral on social media, it put him in violation of those conditions. He was charged with evading, which, while not a violent offense, demonstrated a man still unable to fully separate from the chaos of his environment. Then came August 2022, and a moment that simultaneously boosted Trapboy Freddy's street legend status and revealed the contradictions at the heart of his image in the most absurd way possible. U.S. Marshals and Dallas police executed a federal search warrant at his home. When they got inside, they found two things: a Taurus TCP .380 caliber firearm and a tiger cub, a tiger named Nyla. A real live tiger cub sitting in the home of a man who was a convicted felon on probation and therefore legally prohibited from possessing any firearm whatsoever. He was arrested on federal charges of being a felon in possession of a firearm. He pleaded guilty to that charge. On November 7th, 2020, Trapboy Freddy was sentenced to 16 months in federal prison. He served that time and was released, but not before the whole situation became a media spectacle. His aunt gave an interview to WFAA saying that Freddy was not who people make him out to be, and that despite his criminal history, he had spent a decade doing community work, school supply drives, Christmas toy giveaways in Oak Cliff. That is a real part of his story. He genuinely did that work in the community, but it also stands as a direct contradiction to the persona the music was selling. The music said one thing, the aunt said another, and both of those things were coexisting. From prison, Freddy called his followers on Instagram story with a message that is worth paying close attention to. He told them, "All my youngins, stay focused. Don't forget the objective. Don't get misled. Y'all gotta stick to the script. Make sure y'all stay out of all that bullshit, cause they will use it against you in the court, guilty or not." The phrase "stick to the script" coming from a man whose entire career was built on a carefully maintained script of who he was hit different when you understand everything surrounding it. He was talking to his followers about survival, but he was also, without knowing it, describing his own career. He stuck to the script. He just didn't account for the day when reality would demand something different. Now, out of federal prison and navigating the aftermath of all of this, Trapboy Freddy finds himself drawn into the biggest legal storm in Dallas rap history. The Yella Beezy capital murder trial is not a small-time court date. This is a case with the death penalty on the table. The full weight of the Texas legal system is pointed at Yella Beezy, and the prosecution has 194 witnesses ready to present their case. One of them is Devarius Moore. The pre-trial hearings in July 2026 reveal just how deeply Trapboy Freddy is woven into the fabric of this case. His music, his Instagram live sessions, his conversations with Beezy, all of it was brought into a Dallas courtroom and debated by attorneys. The prosecution argued that lyrics in Freddy and Beezy's joint songs, particularly On Your Head, reflected the real-world dynamics of a murder-for-hire conspiracy. The defense argued that rap lyrics are artistic expression and cannot be taken as literal fact. The judge ultimately allowed some of that music into evidence with certain restrictions, including the stripping of Freddy's voice from On Your Head before it could be played for the jury. But here is the thing. Even with all the legal nuance, the simple fact of Trapboy Freddy's name appearing on that prosecution witness list in the capital murder trial of his musical partner and alleged brother tells you more about who he is than any bar he ever recorded. Because in the world he spent a career claiming to represent, that is not how the real ones move. And the streets of Dallas know that. The Tiger story in particular deserves more attention because it is simultaneously hilarious and deeply revealing. When you are a convicted felon on probation, when the court has conditions attached to your freedom, the absolute last thing you do is acquire an exotic wild animal and a firearm. That is not the behavior of a calculated street operator who has navigated the game for decades and knows how to stay low. That is the behavior of someone who believes so deeply in the image he was projecting. The wild one, the reckless one, the man who does not follow rules, that he cannot separate the character from the man. The Tiger was not a practical decision. It was a brand decision. It was Trapboy Freddy performing Trapboy Freddy for himself in his own home. at the cost of his freedom. And that is one of the most honest windows we have into who he really is. Not a calculated gangster managing operations in the dark, but a man addicted to the image of one. His end statement to WFAA after the arrest is also revealing in a different way. She said he had spent a decade trying to do better, giving out school supplies, distributing Christmas toys in the neighborhood. She was defending her nephew, but she was also inadvertently confirming what the critics had been saying. The image people had of Trapboy Freddy from the music did not match the reality of who he was in the community. The community knew a man who did charity drives. The music was selling a different character entirely. His aunt was drawing a distinction between the two, and she was right to do so. She just did not realize that in doing so, she was supporting the fake image thesis more thoroughly than any YouTube commentary could. Then, out of federal prison and navigating the aftermath of all of this, Trapboy Freddy finds himself drawn into the biggest legal storm in Dallas rap history. The Yella Beezy capital murder trial is not a small-time court date. This is a case with the death penalty on the table. The full weight of the Texas legal system is pointed at Yella Beezy, and the prosecution has 194 witnesses ready to present their case. One of them is Devarius Moore. Reports also indicated that earlier in the investigation, Trapboy Freddy had been named as a wanted individual, someone law enforcement was actively seeking in connection with the case. Whether that was related to his potential as a witness or something more, the details remain partially protected in court documents. What is clear is that at some point between MO3's murder in November 2020 and the 2025 indictment of Yella Beezy, Trapboy Freddy's relationship with law enforcement shifted in a direction that put him on the state's side of the courtroom rather than the defendant's side. That shift is everything. So what does all of this mean? What is the story of Trapboy Freddy, the Dallas rapper who built his brand on the trap image, who became one of the most recognized voices in Texas hip-hop, who collaborated with some of the biggest names in the game, and who is now set to take the stand in his homie's capital murder trial? What does it mean for the bigger picture? First, let's talk about what actually made Trapboy Freddy's career possible, because this is not a story about a man who had no talent. Freddy can rap. His music connected because it tapped into something real that audiences respond to. The voice of the streets, the rawness of someone who has seen things and felt things that most people only read about. The emotion in tracks like Lil Quitter, the authenticity of tone in his collaborations, the chemistry he had with other Dallas artists. These things were not manufactured. His pain was real even if the specific claims about his street activities were embellished. And that is the complicated truth at the heart of the fake image conversation in hip-hop. The best street rappers are not always the ones who did the most in the streets. They are the ones who can translate the experience of those streets into music that resonates broadly. Freddy had that ability, but there is a version of that translation that is honest. I witnessed this. I was adjacent to this. I carry the pain of growing up here. And there is a version that is dishonest. I was the one doing this. I was the architect of this life. The version Freddy sold was much closer to the latter. And when real life arrived to audit the claims, the results did not match the receipts. The trajectory of his criminal record, possession charges, evading arrest, a federal gun charge as a felon on probation, does not describe the criminal resume of a man who ran trap operations as a teenager and built a street empire in Oak Cliff. It describes someone who was around the life, who picked up his habits and his dangers, but who was never the figure in the drug trade that his music implied. The distinction between being of the streets and being what the music said he was is significant, and the people who grew up around him in Dallas knew it. Now with the Yella Beezy trial approaching, the legacy conversation becomes even more poignant, because regardless of what Freddy actually says on that stand, regardless of whether his testimony helps convict Beezy or falls apart under cross-examination, the fact that his positioning in this trial is permanent. In the court of public opinion, in the streets of Oak Cliff and Dallas, and the broader hip-hop culture conversation, Trapboy Freddy testifying for the prosecution against Yella Beezy is the final image in a career built on images. And it is the one image he cannot wrap his way past. Think about it from the perspective of an audience that bought into the Trapboy Freddy brand. You purchased the idea of a man who was loyal to his people, who came from the struggle and stayed true, who was built differently because the streets made him that way. That's what the stage name promised. That's what the music delivered, beat after beat, track after track. But real talk, the man who actually lived that life that Freddy was rapping about would never be in a position of potentially testifying against his closest associate in a capital murder case. That's not even debatable in street culture. That is simply not how it goes. And the fact that Freddy landed there tells you loudly and clearly that the man behind the music was never quite the trap boy he sold himself as. There is also a broader conversation here about the relationship between rap image and real world consequences. Trapboy Freddy is not the first rapper and will not be the last to build a persona that outpaces his actual biography. Hip hop has a long, complicated history with this. The pressure to have authentic street credentials has pushed artists toward embellishment since the genre's early days. Some artists navigate that pressure by being honest about the fact that they are storytellers, that they are painting pictures from the world around them rather than strictly autobiographical accounts. Others double down on the real-life claims, bet everything on a persona, and eventually find themselves having to answer for the gap between what they said and what they did. Trapboy Freddy chose the second path. He built his whole brand on the Trapboy identity being real, being his actual biography, not a character. And that choice, made over years of mixtapes and interviews and social media posts, is what makes this moment so significant. Because when you say this is who I am, rather than this is a character I play, you are making a promise to your audience. And the audience and the streets and the courtroom hold you to that promise. For Yella Beezy, the consequences of this trial are existential. Life in prison or the death penalty. For MO3's family, the trial is about justice for a son, a brother, a father who was gunned down on an interstate highway. For Trapboy Freddy, the consequences are reputational, cultural, and potentially legal depending on what emerges from the proceedings. And for Dallas Rap, for the Oak Cliff scene that produced all of these men, this trial is a reckoning with the cost of beef that was allowed to escalate far beyond music. The fact that Trapboy Freddy's music, his voice, his lyrics, and his Instagram conversations are all sitting in evidence boxes in a Dallas County courtroom is the most vivid illustration possible of what happens when the image meets reality. He rapped about hitters. He rapped about what happens to enemies. He made music with a man who was now accused of ordering a murder, and he had Instagram live conversations with that man in the weeks after the murder happened. Whether he knew what was going on, whether he was involved in any way, whether he simply witnessed things from proximity, those are questions the trial may or may not answer. But his presence in this story, on the prosecution side, is a fact that cannot be undone. What does the Dallas rap community take from this? What does the broader hip-hop community take from this? For starters, the cautionary tale that music is not legally protected the way people think it is. Prosecutors across the country have been using rap lyrics as evidence in trials, and courts have been allowing it. Trapboy Freddy's own voice from a track he recorded with Yella Beezy became a legal issue that had to be adjudicated in pretrial hearings. That is the world rappers are now navigating. When you rap about what you claim you did, and prosecutors believe that those claims are actually evidence of what you did, the music becomes a witness against you. And in this case, it became a witness against both Freddy and his collaborator. There is also something to be said about the Oak Cliff community that raised all of these men. This is a neighborhood that has produced real talent, real culture, and real community resilience. The fact that 3 of its most prominent musical voices, Yella Beezy, MO3, and Trapboy Freddy, are all connected by one act of violence in 2020 is a tragedy that extends far beyond any individual's image or career. MO3 is dead. Yella Beezy is facing the death penalty. Trapboy Freddy is a prosecution witness, and the streets of Oak Cliff are left to process what the loss of all 3 of these figures in very different ways means for the neighborhood. Today, in August 2026, Trapboy Freddy is at a crossroads that his career trajectory made inevitable. He is a man who chose an image and rode it as far as it could take him. It took him to 300 Entertainment, to platinum remix credits, to one of the most recognizable names in Texas rap, and then it took him to federal prison for 16 months, to a subpoena in a capital murder trial, and to a witness stand that may define his legacy more completely than any song he ever recorded. He has 3 kids. He has a community that watched him give out school supplies and Christmas toys. Through the hard years, he has fans who bought the music and lived in it. Those things are real. But the gap between the trap boy he presented and the various more who exist in the court record is real too. And in hip hop, in the streets, and in the cold light of a capital murder trial, that gap does not stay hidden forever. There is another dimension to this story that does not get enough attention, And that is the question of what the Trap Boy name actually cost the people around him. When you build a brand on violence, on drug operations, on the rhetoric of beefs and hitters and bodies, and when people in your orbit take those references seriously, the music stops being just music. It becomes a social signal. It tells other people in the street ecosystem where you stand, who you are aligned with, and what you are claiming to be capable of. Trapboy Freddy's lyrics, particularly his collaboration with Yella Beezy on Your Head, sent a specific signal. Law enforcement detective Eric Barnes testified in court that he read those lyrics as evidence of a real-world posture toward violence. Whether or not Freddy intended the song that way, the signal was sent, was received and acted upon by people who were genuinely in the violent end of the street ecosystem. That is the danger of faking the image,
man.
because the people who are actually in that world do not distinguish between the rapper playing a character and the man himself. When you rap about hiring hitters for $50,000, the people listening in those streets do not say, well, that's just his artistic persona. They say he's about that. And being about that in that world carries obligations and risks that a man who is actually a trap boy knows how to navigate, and that a man who is performing a role does not. Trapboy Freddy, for all his real hardship and real street exposure, appears to have been in the second category. He could sell the image, he could not fully live the consequences of the image.
Man, at the end, this almost already there. You see Trapper's a real one. If you made to this point, bro, make sure you like and subscribe. I can't make videos when y'all up. If they mess with videos, I can't even talk that much, but I appreciate if you made it to this far, man. Appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, man. Shout out to the people, man.